Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and things adjacent. Please remember to like the video and to make sure you are still subscribed. Yet more news out of Australia. Just seems to be, which, and it should be, one of the biggest stories going right now. Because this is huge news. And this definitely draws attention to the idea that climate change is progressing rapidly and is not our friend. It's from January 10. More than this is from the Sydney Morning Herald. More than 30,000 protesters. Well, let's read the headline. Sydney CBD climate protest attracts over 30,000 people. More than 30,000 protesters brushed off hot and humid conditions to voice their displeasure at the federal government's handling of the bushfire crisis and its attitude towards climate change. The event in Sydney's CBD was set up a few weeks ago by UNIS Students for Climate Justice in conjunction with Extinction Rebellion. This kid is holding a sign that says, "Not okay, boomer." The marchers were moving from Town Hall to Parliament House. Organizers were hoping for a larger crowd than at the early December protests, which attracted roughly 20,000 at the same location. This is disgusting. Why are they showing this on this page? Inspector Kerry Coffey said that the number this time around was more than 30,000. Inspector Coffey said the crowd was well behaved on its long march from Town Hall past Parliament House and back to Hyde Park, where it disbanded. Today's turnout eclipses crowd sizes at the two most recent climate protests, but is less than the record 80,000 who packed out the Domain for the school climate strike last September. After a march lasting close to an hour, Friday's march ended outside Hyde Park's Archibald Fountain, where protesters sat on the grass listening to music and dance performances. Protesters chanted, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, ScoMo has got to go," as speakers climbed Town Hall side steps and later moved on to "The Liar from the Shire, the country is on fire." Izzy Raj Seppings, 13, waited to address the crowd. She was given a move-on order by police while protesting outside Kirribilli House last September. Her hope is that Friday's protest will create change. I hope it attracts a lot of attention, gets our prime minister to move and to start thinking about change from fossil fuels to renewables, she said. Green Senator Mehreen Faruqi addressed the crowd. "I stand in front of you today bloody angry," she said. "I don't think I have ever been this angry in my life." She said she was determined to do whatever it took to turn the climate crisis around. "Leadership is totally lacking in our prime minister and this government," she said. Scott Morrison and his government are cowardly. They are dishonest. They are completely incompetent. They have behaved like criminals. Do they need to keep showing this earwax craziness? Stop it. I'm offended. Scott Morrison and his government are cowardly. They are dishonest. They have behaved like criminals, and they are led by Scotty from marketing. Senator Faruqi used a disparaging nickname for Mr. Morrison, referring to his time at Tourism Australia. She said a royal commission into bushfires was just the start, and that climate activists need to be bolder and more radical in the future. Out-of-control bushfires are sweeping across the state, destroying thousands of hectares, houses, and lives, the event description said on Facebook. These fires, heat waves, and droughts are not just unprecedented. They are the direct result of decades of climate destruction at the hands of fossil fuel-loving politicians. Loving them fossil fuels, the climate crisis has compounded hundreds of years of land mismanagement since invasion and decades of profiteering on water, which has left much of the country in drought. A man in the crowd who wanted only to be called Tim said he had traveled up from the fire-ravaged south coast where his family lives. "I've just driven up from Narooma. I drove down to rescue families stuck in the evacuation center. I drove through the towns from Canberra down. You drive for hours. Everything is dead. Everything is burnt. I've got a 7-month-old baby, and it breaks my heart. A Penrith man named Stephen said he had attended because he was sick of not doing anything. I felt like this was at least doing something. We have had so much inaction. Our government, both state and federal, have been embarrassing in the response. Instead of just tweeting, I wanted to physically do something. Ning Ning, who moved to Brisbane from China last year, is visiting Sydney with her son and parents. She didn't expect the protest, but isn't surprised given the severity of the fire crisis. The fires are terrible. A lot of animals have died. She said the government needs to do something. I can see the people are angry. If it was China, the government would control the fires very quickly. Or would they? But in China, we wouldn't have this, she said, pointing to the protesters marching by. Of course not. Protests also took place in other Australian capital cities. About those renewables. Let's read this article. I've already read it. I read this morning. This should be fairly meaty. This is from SRS Rocco Report. Or SO Shrocco. I don't know. The headline is The Renewable Green Energy Myth. 50,000 tons of non-recyclable wind turbine blades dumped in the landfill. This is from January 9th. Funny, no one seems to consider what to do with the massive amount of wind turbine blades once they reach the end of their lifespan. Thus, the irony of the present-day green energy movement is the dumping of thousands of tons of non-recyclable, supposedly renewable wind turbine blades in the country's landfill. Who would have thought? What's even worse is that the amount of wind turbine blades slated for waste disposal is forecasted to quadruple over the next 15 years, as a great deal more blades reach their 15 to 20 year lifespan. Furthermore, though, the size and length of the newly installed wind turbine blades are now twice as large as they were 20 to 30 years ago. Honestly, I hadn't considered the tremendous amount of waste generated by the so-called renewable wind power industry until a long-term reader sent me the link to the following article. Landfill begins burying non-recyclable wind turbine blades. Hundreds of giant windmill blades are being shipped to a landfill in Wyoming to be buried because they simply can't be recycled. Local media reports several wind farms in the state are sending over 900 unreusable blades to the Casper Regional Landfill to be buried. While nearly 90% of old or decommissioned wind turbines, like the motor housing, can be refurbished or at least crushed, fiberglass windmill blades present a problem due to their size and strength. Our crushing equipment is not big enough to crush them, a landfill representative told NPR. Prior to burying the cumbersome, sometimes nearly 300-foot-long blades, the landfill has to cut them up into smaller pieces on-site and stack them in order to save space during transportation. Wyoming isn't the only landfill accepting worn-out wind turbine blades. They are also being dumped in Iowa and South Dakota. Although there's probably a lot more landfills across the country, especially in Texas, that are accepting old wind turbine blades. Texas has the largest amount of wind-generated energy in the United States at 27,036 megawatts, followed by Iowa, 8,965, Oklahoma, 8,072, Kansas, 6,128, and California, 5,842. So, with Texas powering more wind energy than the next three states combined, they will be discarding an enormous amount of wind turbine blades in the state's landfills over the next 10 to 20 years. I actually was unaware that they had such a short lifespan and that this is where they go. So this is news to me. Maybe it's news to you. I don't know. Now, why is the wind power industry discarding its blades in landfills? Unfortunately, due to the way the blades are manufactured, it isn't economical or practical to recycle them, even though some small-scale recycling has been done. Here's an image from the Low Tech Magazine website explaining why the large wind turbine blades aren't recyclable. It's because they are made out of multiple things. It's like, when you have packaging from the store, and It's made of, all, multiple things like plastic inside of, it's got like plastic and some other stuff like located inside the, packed inside of cardboard or paper or whatever. You can't recycle that stuff because it's a composite. It's too hard to separate all the components, so you can't recycle it. You have to throw it away. The wind turbine blades are a toxic amalgam of unique composites. I was just saying this: fiberglass, epoxy, polyvinyl, chloride foam, polyethylene, terephthalate, foam, balsa wood, and polyurethane coatings. So basically, there is just too much plastic, composite, epoxy crapola that isn't worth recycling. Again, even though there are a few small recycling centers for wind turbine blades, it isn't economical to do on a larger scale. As I mentioned, the wind power units built today are getting much taller and larger. Check out the 83-meter, 274-foot-long wind turbine blade being transported for a 7-megawatt system. This picture was taken in 2016, so in about 15 to 20 years, this blade will need to be replaced. Just think of the cost to remove 3 massive blades this size, cut them up, transport them to a landfill, and cover them with tons of soil. Also remember that it took fossil fuels to make these blades. And unlikely that, we will have enough renewable energy to take these blades apart when it is time to do so. Bremer we will, maybe we won't. Now multiply that by tens of thousands of blades. According to the data from the Hochschule, Bremerhaven, and Alstrom Munkjo, the wind industry will generate 50,000 tons of blade waste in 2020. But that will quadruple to 225,000 tons by 2034. That's not very long from now. I have read that some estimates show an even higher amount of blade waste over the next 10 to 20 years. I don't believe the public realizes what a horrible waste of resources that wind energy is. When you start to look at the entire operation from beginning to end, wind energy is definitely not renewable, and even worse, the wind turbines are not lasting as long as the 20 to 25 years forecasted by the industry. A study that came out in 2012 by Gordon Hughes, researching the relatively mature Dutch and UK wind industry, suggested that only a few of the wind farms would be operating for more than 12 to 15 years. Wind and solar, a disaster on the electric grid. The one thing not mentioned by the renewable energy aficionados is that the more solar and wind that is added to the grid, the more volatile and problematic it becomes. You see, the U.S. electric grid has been powered by base load energy from coal, natural gas, and nuclear for the most part. This type of energy generation is very stable, which is precisely why it's called base load energy. When wind and solar came onto the picture, the renewable energy aficionados thought this clean green energy was going to get rid of dirty fossil fuel power plants. Unfortunately, the more wind and solar that are added, the more baseload energy has to be removed. Why is that unfortunate? Because when the wind stops blowing and the sun stops shining, then the electric utility industry is forced to turn on the natural gas power plants to make up the difference. And let me tell you, this is becoming much more of a big problem when the wind energy that was generating 40% of the electricity in the area totally falls off the very next day when the wind stops blowing. I have read several articles showing examples of the extreme shut-in of wind and solar electric generation in a very short period of time. There's so much information out there about this intermittency problem. Let me provide a perfect example taking place in Germany. Germany installed one hell of a lot of wind and solar and is now becoming a nightmare because they are suffering from blackouts, while at the same time their citizens are paying some of the highest electricity rates in Europe. I wonder, I'm taking this author at their word. I wonder if this is true. Anybody in Germany want to confirm this for me, that they're having blackouts? And also paying some of the highest electricity rates in Europe. Germany's renewable energy disaster part 1, wind and solar deemed technological failures. Germany's wind and solar experiment have failed. And I read something about this a few months ago. The so-called Wende energy transition has turned into an insanely costly debacle. German power prices have rocketed, blackouts and load shedding are the norm, and idyllic rural communities are now industrial wastelands. See picture, I guess they're talking about this. Hundreds of billions of euros have been squandered on subsidies to wind and solar, all in an effort to reduce carbon dioxide gas emissions. However, that objective has failed too. CO2 emissions continue to rise. But you wouldn't know it from what appears in the mainstream media. Its reticence to report on what's actually going on in Germany probably stems from the adage about success having many fathers and failure being an orphan. Having promoted Germany as the example of how we could all transition to an all renewable energy future, it's pretty hard for them to suck it up and acknowledge that they were taken for fools. The article above, so they have a link to the rest of that article. The article above came from the website stopthesethings.com, which I highly recommend checking out. They put out a lot of excellent material on global wind industry. For example, I found an interesting article about a wind turbine that was purchased by Akron Westfield School Board that went operational in 1999. The wind turbine was supposed to provide the school district with approximately 2 teachers' salaries worth of revenue once the loan was paid off after 10 years. According to the article from stopthesethings.com, after a decade of dashed financial hopes, mechanical failures, and punishingly costly repairs, the school has been left to lick its wounds and lament. The experience to date has been a total financial failure, and now comes the whopping cleanup bill to have the nightmare removed for good. I recommend reading the entire article because it's worth a good laugh. I believe the author of the article misunderstood and thought the town of Akron was in Ohio, but it was located in Iowa. Once you read the article, it plays like the typical trail of tears as the poor school board was plagued with mechanical failures and issues that cost one hell of a lot of money, and just when the wind turbine was going to be paid off after 10 years, it broke down for good. LOL. That's correct, and the wind turbine has been sitting there idle for nearly a decade, rotting away. And now, it seems that the school board is placing the $220,000 cost to disassemble and dispose of the wind turbine in their $5.2 million bond. Again, LOL. I have to tell you, I'm simply amazed at the level of insanity and stupidity taking place by individuals, companies, corporations, and countries that are ramping up wind and solar energy. They are a complete disaster and will only get worse as times go by. Or times go by, whatever you want. Lastly, the world should have used the energy that has been investing in wind solar and put it into transitioning our society to a smaller footprint or degrowth. So this is amazing. I was reading this entire article that thinking like this guy is, maybe on the denier side of the spectrum or whatever, or just, one of those like paid anti-renewable trolley types that are out there, right? I'm actually not a huge fan of converting our entire society to renewable energy. But, I think that there are some people that are banking on having these kind of articles come out to, dissuade people from going renewable, like, let's just continue to burn fossil fuels. So that's what I was thinking the whole time I was reading this. And then I got to this sentence and I was like, oh, beautiful, right? This is the actual message that needs to be heard. Lastly, the world should have used the energy that has been investing in wind and solar and put it into transitioning our society to a smaller footprint or degrowth. Beautiful. That was the smart and logical move. However, we are taking the last bit of good fossil fuel energy and putting it into non-recyclable, supposedly renewable green technology boondoggles that will become serious liabilities in the future, as we won't have the available energy to properly disassemble and dispose of the tens of thousands of wind turbines dotting the landscape. So anyways, good article, and I appreciate the message at the end. I don't know. I have mixed emotions about renewables because I think that, for the most part, it's a bad, the mining of the minerals and the support of industrial civilization that renewables will give us or whatever. everybody that's into the whole let's transition to renewables thing, it's like, yeah, we can carry on living the way we live and have the lifestyle that we have, and that's absolutely not true, and is going to put us into a ecological hole, as much as using fossil fuels will. However, I do think that the continued development of renewable energy is going to, we're going to make breakthroughs. There's going to be better and more logical ways to develop renewable energies that won't be so destructive to the planet. So I'm of two minds. I'm like, renewables are not the answer, and if we continue to develop better renewable energy sources, we can get ourselves to a place where we're not destroying the planet while giving ourselves energy, or less destructive means. I'm not sure any of this is going to happen in time, of course, but just walk down that road with me, if you will. Anyways, let me know your thoughts on this. I'm going to move on to one more article before I finish this video. This is yet another installation of Way Past What the Fuck, titled OK Doomer, from Tuesday, January 7th. So it's like this. We have fucked this place up so bad that there is no coming back, and it is only going to be a matter of a few years before there is a massive degradation of the habitat that supports us, or habitat. Okay, Doomer, you don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. We as a species may very well be extinct in the near future. Okay, Doomer, is this not sinking in? This is really bad. We are dangerously close to the end of the human race. Okay, Doomer. This is what I feel like when I try to impress upon people the gravity of this predicament. The combination of condescension and pity in their voices and responses makes me a little bit sick. Like pointing out that there is a gun pointed at their head and they just say, yeah, I don't think so, or we'll see. We'll see what? I mean, look around you, for God's sake. Sweet Jeebus, what about this don't you get? Is it because you can still drive to the store or buy gas or have water coming out of the tap that convinces you that there is no problem? What is it? Tell me, convince me that I'm wrong. I would love you to not only convince me, but to prove it. If I am wrong, I want nothing more than to admit it. Or is it that you secretly believe that I'm right, but you don't want to cop to it? Okay, Doomer. So where do we go from here? Is it enough to accept that the majority of the population will not accept this? Do we sit back and let them go on? Do we start wearing t-shirts that say you were warned? What, if anything, should we do? There seems to be a lot more questions than there are answers. It seems kind of mean to just let them go on, but then it's kind of hard to stop them. It's like watching someone back slowly towards a cliff and telling them just a few more steps. I want them to know. I want them to understand. I want them to look at the evidence. I want them to begin the process of letting go. But all I get is, okay, Doomer. I have begun to ask one person each day what they would be doing right now if they only had 2 years to live. There is only one right answer to this question, and that is exactly what I am doing now. So far, I have not received the right answer from anyone. Some of them have allowed that this is a thought-provoking question, but they shut down immediately if I mention that it's not a rhetorical question. So here we are on the tracks, hurtling toward oblivion, and all they can say is, okay, Doomer. I am awfully close to giving up on them, not asking the questions, not really getting myself into a lather if they don't get it. I am awfully close to saying, whatever, denier. And that, my friends, is that. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.